Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm Sam Holland, and I serve as Dean of the Meadows School of the Arts. It is a delight and a privilege to welcome you to this very special program. Today we celebrate the 30th anniversary of the splendid Fisk Opus 101 that you see before you here in Caruth Auditorium. And we celebrate the legacy of Dr. Robert T. Anderson, Distinguished Professor of Organ at SMU from 1960 until 1996. His full bio is in the program. And I have the honor of introducing several distinguished guests who are in the audience today. When I call your name, would you either stand or wave so that we can welcome you? First, the sister and the nephew of Dr. Anderson, Dorothy Fowler and Carl Fowler, are with us today. We are grateful for their presence. Also with us today are SMU trustee Sarah Perot and her mother, Leah Fullenwider, for whom the Leah Fullenwider Endowed Centennial Chair of Organ, held currently by Dr. Stefan Ingalls, is named. Let's welcome trustee Perot and Leah Fullenwider. All of today's performers studied with Dr. Anderson. Many of his students, and there were hundreds over the decades, hold major positions in churches and academia throughout the world. We are fortunate to have this exceptional group of 9 on the program today. In addition to his work securing Fisk to build Opus 101 here in Caruth, Dr. Anderson was instrumental in acquiring its big brother, Fisk Opus 100, downtown in the Meyerson Symphony Center. And with us today are special guests from the Fisk Organ Company, its president, Michael Kraft, and Nami Hamada, tonal director. Would you let us recognize you? Today we also celebrate the release of a new book that you may have seen in the lobby, Music from the Hilltop, Organs and Organists at Southern Methodist University by Benjamin Kolodziej, a major contribution to the literature on organ and church music history in Texas. And we celebrate the first volume, CDs 1 through 4, of Stefan Ingalls' massive recording project, The Complete Organ Works of J.S. Bach, on the Motet label. In the audience today is Director of Motet, Giovanni Solinas. Let's welcome him. And I would also like to acknowledge and honor the presence of Dr. Larry Palmer, Professor Emeritus of Organ and Harpsichord at SMU from 1975 until his retirement just a few years ago. Dr. Palmer, we're delighted that you can be with us here today. And finally, I'm pleased to introduce Michael Barone, creator and moderator of the world-famous program Pipedreams on NPR from American Public Media. Michael will take it from here. Thank you all and enjoy. Let's welcome Michael Barone.
I guess I'll use this microphone to start, although there are 2 for stereo, you know. My relationship to Bob Anderson goes back to mid-1970s when he appeared at St. John's University in Collegeville, where I was the music director of what was then already a growing public radio network. I recorded him in concerts on the Abbey's Holtkamp organ. Some years later, he came to Minneapolis and was one of the inaugural recitalists on a new instrument that Robert Sipe had built for Hennepin Avenue United Methodist Church. I've come to Dallas numerous times for the inauguration of the Meyerson Fisk organ and for the inauguration of the organ here at Caruth. I've been here for the 3 Dallas competitions and have been back on other occasions. But I'm a radio guy, and we're used to being alone in a room and not seeing anyone. And my trick announcement at this point is that you don't look like I expected you to either. and I actually can sort of see you. I just had cataract surgery and lens replacement, which is why I'm using glasses to read my notes. I was thinking of Robert Anderson. I worked with him on several occasions, was invited to his house for dinner at least once, and as a kind of peripheral guy, my personality is that way. I'm always off to the side, watching, listening. I found him to be an extraordinary individual, and as you will hear from the comments of the various performers today who worked with him as his students, a very well-rounded personality. Later, we'll have a piece of music that George Baker has written to commemorate Robert T. Anderson, or as I am told, I never did this myself, it was often called just RTA. And I was thinking about those letters which George will turn into musical notes. But RTA, what does it mean? Rehearse technique assiduously? I expect so, because all of his students were put to the test. And if they did not rehearse their technique assiduously, they would hear from RTA. The other, I think, element not only of his teaching, but of his own playing, which was vital and vibrant and extraordinarily alive, was rhythmic thinking always. How much of RTA is in the DNA of our players will be up for you to determine as you listen to them perform. Our first, a remarkable man who himself, I expect in the years to come, will be memorialized in some way, but already is through the many recordings that he has made of the complete organ works of Bach twice, of the complete organ works of Louis Vierne, and of many other composers along the way. I've known him as a friend for many years, and more intimately in the last several, because he has become a Minnesotan, as I am. Would you welcome our first performer, Wolfgang Rübsam. Well, Wolf is coming down from the organ loft. I'll reflect on the fact that actually you can purchase his recent recording of the entire Orchestral Suite Number 3 and Orchestral Suite Number 2 and the chaconne from the second violin partita in his own transcriptions, recorded on a lovely Cassavant instrument at Church of St. Louis, King of France in St. Paul, to be released next month on the Brilliant Classics label, and it should be available at all online streaming locations. Is that close to correct? Why don't you come up next to this microphone, Wolf? It does work. You came to Southern Methodist University after a considerable amount of study with the esteemed German organist Helmut Walsche. And it was through the connection with Robert Anderson, who himself studied with Walsche, that you ended up here. Did you know what you were getting into? And what did you learn once you came to Southern Methodist?
First of all, I came because I was in a pinch to avoid military drafting in Germany, mandatory drafting after you graduate from high school.
Try the other one.
Sorry about that. There were these connections in Frankfurt through the Fulbright program that also I think Bob Anderson was studying under with Professor Walsche, the blind organist of Germany that just could play everything without music, and it was very impressive, of course, also for Bob Anderson. And through that connection of the Fulbright program, he had a student in Frankfurt just at that time when I was interested to prolong my studies artificially so I wouldn't get drafted. So there was this contact suddenly established to Bob Anderson, and because Walsche had about 80 students from America by that time, and so he suggested to go to Bob Anderson, and of course Bob probably was quite flattered to get a letter from Walsche and with the request that he had a student that he would like to study with him. And so this is how I really arrived at SMU, through that kind of forced need of prolonging my studies because I was too young to graduate. And so here I arrived at Bob Anderson's Department of Organ Studies, and yes, it was not at all what I would have expected. It was hard work, let me tell you. It was expected that you produce every week major work, and I remember I practiced every day 6 hours at least. Maybe some exceptions, but for the most part 6 hours. And every week I was able to bring in new pieces and new repertoire. It was just staggering what I learned in 1 year. It was unbelievable. And so
You went on to study with Marie Carolina after that. I'm just wondering, take those three. What is it specifically that your time with Anderson gave to you, left with you?
well, it was actually being a really strong pilot of that airplane, of that organ, because I was not really used to playing large organs at the time, and I had to learn how to push those pistons and also adjust to the radiating pedal board. And well, it was just this energy that I learned from Bob to be just very productive, and it was expected that way, and there was just no circle around it, and I respect that still to this day, and I also respect his organizational skills. He was totally focused on what he would do at what time during the day and how he would close the day and start the next one. And that impressed me also as on the kind of a personal level that had nothing to do with music, but I learned to be a very organized person, and I'm still that today.
I thought that was just your German background. We attribute that to Dr. Anderson.
Well, Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And now for something entirely different, Ross Wood came to Southern Methodist University from down south, further south, and I think, well, he went on and has been most of his professional life fixture of the New England scene, the Boston area. He still resides. Would you greet our next soloist? His music of Peter, here is a possibility. interesting to juxtapose Bach and Vidor. You don't think of them as being at all in the same milieu, but remember that Bach's music was not all that popular after his death. Mendelssohn, 100 years after the first performance of St. Matthew Passion, brought the Bach revival to fruition. It was still something of a hard nut to crack in Paris, but Albert Schweitzer was able to convince Vidor that Bach had something to say. Though I don't think there's any Bach reference in the symphony at all. Ross, when you studied here as an Aeolian Skinner, and from looking at your vitae, you went on to be organist, assistant organist at churches with big Aeolian Skinner organs. Was that an imprint here, or is that just by chance?
I think as the oldest living associate organist in captivity, I just played what they put in front of me, but I happen to be very, very lucky in playing the organs at Church of the Advent. But they were much earlier than the era of the Aeolian Skinner that was here. But certainly it was instructive. A lot of things in church music, as much as I did learn from Bob, one of the things that you learned on the job was accompanying. So I'm glad to know that that's taught in more curricula now. But Bob was a transformative and extraordinary influence on my life. It's safe to say that arriving as a teenager from small-town Louisiana, my first reaction was abject fear, but that quickly turned to respect for the standards that Bob had. He had just come back from a 6-week study tour of European organ, so everything was fresh and vital and alive. And he applied the same rigorous standards that Wolfgang spoke of, that he expected of his students. He applied them to himself. He regularly practiced. He was always working on something interesting. So it was a true inspiration to be around him and around his standards and to try to live up to them as best we all could. Bob also had other transformative aspects of his personality. He had style. From his Neiman Marcus shirts to his ballet loafers to his talk of food. I can remember learning so much from him that pears needn't be canned and embalmed in lime jello. They could also be fresh and poached in sauterne and served with sour cream and grated lemon zest. Or that the green bean church supper casserole was a long way from haricot vert amandine. So at Bob's house, there were wonderful dinner parties, and he didn't suffer fools gladly, and he had a way of almost putting a little umlaut thing on it, fools. But when I drove by where his house was and thought of the dinner parties there, it's now a McMansion, and I know I could hear Bob saying, "Oh, how vulgar," which was one of his favorite expressions. So along with Larry Palmer, the art history professor Mary Jordan, who taught us how to look at the world differently. Bob taught us how to hear everything with great precision and detail. I'm tremendously grateful to what happened to me here. If I may, the Symphony Romane is Vidor's true Easter piece, arguably more than the toccata, because it's based entirely upon the introit plain song for Easter morning, Hec Dies. This is a day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. So I would like to dedicate that performance not only to the memory of Bob, but to the many of my classmates who were later lost to that very cruel thief of talent, the AIDS epidemic. And if you allow me, I would just like to read their names from the time that I was here. Jim Bragg, Richard DeLong, Tony King, Robert Love, Garnet Minger, Ken Nienhuis, Paul Rideau, and Rick Ross. Gentlemen, that lullaby was for you.
It's hard to know what to say after that. But we have yet another interesting transition from a young fellow who comes up from small town Louisiana and gets the spark really ignited here, to a woman who made the transition from the previous administration of the organ department here at Southern Methodist University. Sorry, my Minnesota is coming through. And then came back to try it out with Dr. Anderson. And we'll have some interesting stories. From Barbara Marquardt, would you welcome her, please? Oh, what fun. A life of love of music exemplified in what we just heard. Just extraordinary. I only met Barbara for the first time last evening. We really didn't have much time to chat, but she did tell me that she has some interesting stories to tell, and I expect that that's the case because some stories were told on her after she left the party. I think it's still working. Give it a try. Yeah. Quite a transition, and interesting that you took 10 years off between your undergraduate degree here at Southern Methodist University. Were you waiting? Bob just came that next year. Were you waiting for him to settle in and prove himself before you decided to continue?
Actually, Bob arrived in 1960, and that was just when my previous teacher, Dora Barkley, had passed away. In the next year or two, he and I became good friends. Bob was great at friendship, and thank you. Okay, and he made friends with several people, and it was not until five years later, actually, that I started he allowed me to do my graduate work on a part-time basis because I had 2 other jobs. Well, by the time I finished, I had been on his load for 5 years, and he said he'd never do that again. But, of course, when I was in the studio playing for a lesson, the friendship was not there. It was just plain cut and dried. You know, I remember his main remark that I remember the most was, "I don't need to hear that again."
I think that's a good comment, is it?
Well, I thought it was at the time, but I've since changed my mind. But it was a wonderful time, and I learned so much. And there were wonderful other students, many of whom you're going to hear tonight, that were there at that time. And then Bob asked me to join the adjunct faculty after I finished my graduate work, and that was one of the finest compliments I have ever received. And I loved every minute of that, working with Bob and with Larry Palmer and all those wonderful students. And I heard so much wonderful music just in organ class. So as far as Bob is concerned, he's etched into my every thought. And he's made me something that I had no idea I could be, but he did that for everyone.
How much differently did he treat you from being a student and to being a colleague?
In the studio, it was just straight business, and I was just a student. As soon as we walked out and walked up the stairs and walked outside the building, he said, "Bar, where are we going for lunch?" So it was he was 2 people, but he was very kind to me. He didn't give me too much difficulty.
I dare say he shouldn't have. Thank you, Barbara. Next, a colleague and friend from Minnesota, where I'm from. We were delighted when Dean Billmeyer achieved the position of organist at the University of Minnesota. His inaugural recital, playing the big 108-rank 1932 Aeolian Skinner organ at Northrop Auditorium, opened with the Meistersinger Overture and the Edwin Lemaire transcription. It's exactly the sort of piece that organ wants to play, and Dean played the pants off it. He's not going to do anything like that for us today. We have the opposite end of the aesthetic spectrum. It's the music of Mufat. Would you welcome Dean Billmeyer? During the intermission, you'll be able to go out into the lobby and see a display not only of the history of the organ department here at Southern Methodist University, but also some of the accomplishments of the performers who are in the program today. Mr. Kolodziej's book, sampling of some of the recordings that Wolf Rubsam has made, the recording that Dean recently did with the Straube edition of Bach, which was certainly not in style, I don't think, back when Dean, where are you, Dean, was a student here. There you are. You're just making me nervous. Tell me about the transition from studies with David Craighead and coming to Southern Methodist University.
Hi, Michael. It's good to see you. Hello, everybody. It's great to see you all here. I actually think I was the first organ graduate of the Eastman School of Music to come to SMU for graduate work. And there were several reasons for that, one of which is a gentleman who played beautifully a little while ago. Ross Wood arrived in the mid-'70s as a graduate student in organ at Eastman. His classmate, John Chappell Stowe, who you know had a long career at the University of Wisconsin, also arrived, and they talked a great deal about their SMU experience. And when it came time for me to shop around for graduate schools, I decided to give SMU a look. And I wound up here. Plus, just to take the spotlight away from Dr. Anderson for just a moment, a real plus for me was that I could pursue my interest in early music and harpsichord study with Larry Palmer, who is here tonight. Thank you, Dr. Palmer. I was also very fortunate indeed to be offered the music assistantship at Perkins Chapel at the School of Theology, and I could observe Dr. Anderson on a weekly basis in chapel services and work with his great colleague in choral conducting, the late Lloyd Fouch. And so I think I learned things here that I could not have learned anywhere else.
Which is wonderful, is it not? Do you have anything more to add to the lore of RTA?
How many hours do we have to tell stories? I will mention one thing. Others have already spoken about Dr. Anderson's work ethic, his incredible energy, his musical and rhythmic playing, the breadth of his knowledge of the organ and its repertoire and the profession. I experienced also that through these elements and his admittedly rather forceful personality, that he exuded a great joy in his daily work and in the music that he taught and performed. And this was very evident all the time. So that's what I'll add to what others have said about Dr. Anderson.
Thank you, Dean. Wonderful to hear you. She has been for numerous decades the stalwart energy at the University of Washington in Seattle. Would you welcome our next soloist? Are you there? Carol Terry. I thought I'd do something a little different and meet her upstairs. Yeah, save a little time. Question for you. Come on out here where the people can see you. I'm wondering whether Bob treated the girls different from the boys.
Well, see, I'm trying to breathe here. My mouth is all dry. He was a little harder on us, maybe, but I think he was hard on everybody. He expected a lot, and when you gave a lot, you got a lot. And I think that it really says it all about Bob. And he was a master of pedagogy and literature, and what he did is he would come in and lecture, and he wouldn't even have a book in his hand. He would just sit down and he would talk. And it was just amazing what the man knew. Just absolutely amazing what he knew.
So are you just like him now?
I like him now. There were moments I didn't.
As a teacher, were you like him?
Was I like him? Not at all. Not at all. No, I was a little too loose with my students, and I did expect a lot, but I did not expect them to learn a piece a week. And you know, Bob really did expect us to have a lot of repertoire learned. And I was talking to, you know, whether it was Chris or Anderson or who, but we all were asked to, you know, take a Rager piece and learn it, and we had to bring it back within a week. And I think mine was Straf mich nicht, or I came back and I said, "You've got to be kidding me." He said, "No, I'm not kidding you." So I went and played, and he said, "Well, that was pretty good." And I thought, no, it wasn't. I felt like I was flailing around, but he saw that I could do it, and that was what it was. He saw that I could do it. And I have to tell a quick funny story, because I know we're getting short on time, but Bob loved a good joke. But one of the things that he was really very, very hardcore about was pronouncing things correctly. So I came in to him with Messiaen's God Among Us, and I said, "Well, I'm going to play Du Parmi Nous." And he said, "Oh my God, how vulgar." Another vulgar. He said, "That's Dieu parmi nous." And so we decided that when we had a fun student recital, what we would do is that we would put, I would be the student and George Baker would be Bob. And so he came in, I came in, and Bob was sitting there in his chair, and he said, "What do you have to play for me today?" I said, "Du Parmi Nous," and then I said, you know, and he said, "Du Parmi Nous." And so what happened was then people started moving the old Caruth organ around, and Bob was in hysterics. He was absolutely in hysterics. I was trying, and George was trying to push me off the bench and do the toccata section. This is with hands flailing around. This is what we do. Da, 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 da. So, yeah, we had a good time. And we thought Bob might be mad. Bob was laughing so hard he couldn't hardly stand it.
And I think the way he was kind to you after Straf mich nicht, maybe he did treat women a little better than he did men. Thank you. Thank you, Carol. This is kind of fun up here. Don't worry, you don't have to gasp as he sat down to play. You have about a 10-minute intermission. Disport yourselves as you wish, or just stand up and flex those knees. See you shortly.
sick. This one. Yeah. It was cutting out.
This one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I ended up using this one. All right. Thank you, Carol. Please take your seats, ladies and gentlemen. You're right. The show is about to recommence. Come on in. Settle down. The real diehards are returning. I thank you. It's always interesting to see who turns up at the second half of an organ concert. You guys will all get special stars. Bob Anderson would probably give you a passing grade in your organ lit class. There is nothing that I need to say that you can't read about Chris Anderson in your program. So, since he is ready and set to go, welcome, Professor Christopher Anderson. Thank you, Chris. I probably will ask him whether he's made transcriptions of the other 23 in that cycle. But I hope he doesn't take as long as possible to get down the stairs here, do a John Cage homage in our Robert T. Anderson celebration. Come on, don't be shy. I guess the question is there are 23 others. Are you going to work on those too? No?
No. Well, some. Some of them fit on the piano really well, and some of them fit on the organ very well.
I was thinking of this as a piano piece with those long-held low notes. What's the piano doing?
It repeats them, yeah, and the organ doesn't need to. So I wish Shostakovich had composed organ music. He would have been really good at it, I think. So
He did in one of his operas. There's a big, extensive, and not particularly friendly piece. What was it like studying with Robert Anderson, and was that experience instructive enough to you to want you to come back here and be on the faculty at SMU?
yes, so I knew you were going to ask me this, so I studied up and I decided what I would say. So here's what I'm going to say. So I came here, and I was here for 3 years, and my first year here, I didn't know quite what to do with Bob. He was a strange personality, an interesting personality, and I didn't quite know how to handle him. And he went away every weekend, most weekends he was gone, playing concerts, doing master classes. And in the spring of my first year here, he came back from one of those times, and he met me in the hall down here, and he was walking one way, I was walking the other way. And I said, Bob, how did your weekend go? How did the thing go? He said, oh, it was just great. You know, I played here, I did this, I taught these students, and so on and so forth. And then he said, he launched into this kind of sermon, which I learned that he did. And he said, you know, he said, I go these places and, you know, I tell people about things in Bach, the current research in Bach and in other things. And he said, people ask me, Chris, how I know these things. And he said, do you want to know how I know these things? And I said, well, sure, Bob, how do you know these things? And he got right up in my face, and he went, and he poked me, and he said, because I read, that's why. And then he walked away. He walked away. And this was, I've thought about this many, many times, and I thought, you know, it's not the only one, but it's one of the first nudges that I had toward saying, you know, academic music study can accommodate playing, and playing can accommodate academic music study. And there's a precarious but not at all impossible balance between the two, and I think that he gave me that. I think he set me on the road to that. So.
And your coming back to SMU was only happenstantial?
It was, in fact, happenstantial, yes.
And a happy happenstantial.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you for being with us and staying with us. Resident faculty, Christopher Anderson. The man who wrote the book. Welcome, Benjamin Kolodziej. You've gotten a taste of another aspect of Robert Anderson that is largely unknown, even in the world of the organ, and that is as a composer, an area in which he was very busy in the 50s and 60s. And Benjamin, I expect in your research for the book about the music here at Southern Methodist University and digging around in the Anderson archives, well, tell me what you discovered.
I mean, what's not in there? I mean, there's everything. Personal memorabilia, I think there's some keys to one of his cars. All sorts of that didn't make the book. But what's interesting, like you alluded to, I learned that he was such a great composer. And his early career was toward composition. That's why I decided to play this piece, and George is playing the next one, to show what kind of composer he was. He composed these short little pieces, but also some great barn burners. That was all new to me. I knew him as a teacher, not even as a performer, since I was his last undergraduate student, along with Brent Johnson up there. We didn't know him as a performer. We certainly didn't know him as a composer. So going into the archives, not only have I enjoyed seeing the slides and the pictures and the letters, but I've enjoyed exploring his compositions.
What was study at SMU like with Bob in those last years of his tenure here?
Well, I know that earlier generations talk about the parties they had and all of these things, and he was really, I didn't know him in that. I totally missed out on that. I'm not really a party person, so I'm okay with that. But I didn't know him as a performer either. At that point, he retired in '96 and stayed on as an adjunct to teach us, and he wasn't able to play like he could, even to play examples for us. But he could always sing. He learned that from Walcha. He could sing the part, so I didn't feel like I didn't get the full experience from him. But I was glad to be one of his final students, and I kind of thought that propelled me into writing the book about him.
Is everything we need to know about Robert Anderson in the book about music at SMU, or is there an appendix that needs to be published in maybe softbound or online?
Oh, the archive is extensive, and so just be glad that I culled that. He was an interesting fellow. He was a great person. There's much more in the archives. Maybe somebody wants to do a dissertation or something on him.
On the music, how many compositions are there?
Surprisingly, quite a few. I'd say many dozen, including his dissertation at Union, which is a cantata called Garden of Gethsemane, beautifully calligraphed, about this thick. It was amazing, the number of compositions, dozens and dozens. From an early age, like age 8, a fugue.
A fugue at age 8. All right, Benjamin, thank you so much. And your book is in the lobby for sale, and he'll autograph it also, right? For no extra charge. Thank you. And now if Dr. Baker, or Doctors Baker, would assume the position, and we will hear the next piece by Robert T. Anderson. George Baker, our soloist, would you welcome him? Thank you, George. It's interesting. I should note that Dr. Anderson had many phenomenal students, but he also enjoyed having been the teacher of two talented guys who went on to win the chart competition in France. He is the only American teacher who has had a student win twice at chart, if I'm correct. Sounds right. And George was one of those, and Wolf Rubsam the other. George, your relation, I mean, Bob Anderson must have been just out of this world to have you as a student, I'm going to guess. What was that like?
Well, I tell you, Bob Anderson was a world changer. If you look on the buses at SMU, there's a slogan that says world changers made here or world changers created here. But let me tell you, it should say sometimes world changers work here. And he was a world changer. And I think he made a lot of world changers too, some of whom are in this room. And it was extraordinary. He came to SMU in 1960, and I was 9 years old, and I heard him in Perkins Chapel play the organ. And it's really thanks to Bob that I became an organist, because he played all kinds of great stuff, Bach and Louis Vierne and Jean Langlais, composers that I fell in love with, I'd never heard before. So I owe, I think, my entire career to Bob Anderson. And I think it was 2003 at the Dallas International Organ Competition. Afterwards, Bob was sitting. At that point, he had pretty advanced Parkinson's, and he wasn't very animated, but anyway, I came to him and I said, "Bob, I love you." And I thought that was kind of weird maybe to say that, but I felt that, and I felt that I had to say that to him. And, you know, I started crying. It was a moment that I will always cherish, and I think he felt it too.
And I'm sure if it was in his character to say, "George, I love you," he would have. I think he expressed that also at the point when you decided to take a little adventure outside of music, though you only learned about that last night, I understand. And I'm sure he loved you every bit as much as you did him. Thank you for playing his music. Do you want to talk about the piece that is going to conclude today? I mean, we just say Robert Anderson, and we don't think about background, but Andersson, he was very much a Swedish fellow, and I've been playing around with the RTA earlier, but you've turned RTA into music and a tribute to Bob in the last piece we'll have today. You want to talk about that a bit?
Sure. Very quickly, I wanted to honor Bob and honor this organ and this occasion and all of you for being here and listening to all this with a new piece. And the first time I ever heard a piece of French composer Jean Langlais, with whom I would later study in Paris, Bob played that here, and it was called Chant de Paix, or Song of Peace. And it's a beautiful piece, relatively short, very quiet piece of meditation. And I said, I'm going to write a meditation too. It will be called Chant d'Espoir, or Song of Hope. And the RTA thing was easy. You start with A, you go up the white keys and assign A, B, C, D, E, the letters of the alphabet, and it turned out that RTA was D, F natural, and A. So perfect, D minor triad. And then I said, we have to do something Swedish. So what do people in Sweden sing? And I went online and discovered that university students that are graduating in Sweden, they have a big a big dinner with a drunk fest, and they sing this song to the tune of Hanson Place, or Shall We Gather at the River, composed by Robert Lowry, an American, in 1876. And I always thought by the river was, well, just somebody on a summer day went to a river and went swimming, you know. But no, it's a reference to Revelation 22, verses 1 to 2. It's a vision of a beautiful river and the angels of Jesus, and the dearly departed are all at the river drinking from the river of life. And I said, that's the tune I want to use. But anyway, so the Swedish students, they don't sing at the river. They sing, I have never tried snuff, never smoked a cigar, hallelujah. My virtues are 1,000, no sinful vices do I have. And on it goes, Bacchus plays the guitar, Satan plays his harmonium, all devils dance the tango, and cognac in every gutter. I mean, it's great. I said, Bob would love it. That's the tune. And so you'll hear that in this piece.
But we're not allowed to drink on campus, right? Thank you, George.
Thank you.
Now I introduce Giovanni. We go to Giovanni next, yes? Okay. We have a special guest today, and where? I hear. Oh, there you are. Come on down. He is. We've been conversing in English. His native Sprach is Italian. He speaks German and has found himself to be the new curator of the Motette German Schallplatten label, an extensive catalog of recordings that goes back to even before he was born. And he will explain a little bit of his connection to Southern Methodist University. Giovanni Salinas.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a big pleasure here with you. And yes, thank you very much, Mr. Barone, for introducing me. Yeah, just a little something about me. I'm from the city of Alghero, on the western coast of the island of Sardinia. This is located in the Mediterranean Sea. I grew up playing organ located in my hometown cathedral, where I had the distinct honor of playing often of all the town's people. I now live in Germany, where I am director of music of the parish of St. Cornelius and Peter in Viersen-Dulken. It's near Cologne. In this church happened to be the very first organist position of Stefan Engels. I have also been the director of the Motette Psalite CD publishing company. In the 47 years of the Motette label's existence, about 500 recordings have been made, covering a wide range of church music repertoire. The label's main focus is on organ music. However, it has also become known for recordings of Gregorian chant, choral music, and bells. Some extremely rare organs and organ works have been recorded by Motette. For example, Marcel Dupre's house organ, or works by the Lübeck composer and Messian pupil Manfred Kluge. Also, recordings from such well-known churches as Cologne Cathedral in Germany and historical recordings by famous personalities such as Pierre Cochereau, Marcel Dupré, and Gaston Littez. In other words, almost everything of distinction in the organ world, be it instruments and or organists, can be found at Motete. Today it is my great pleasure to present the exciting new Motete project in collaboration with Professor Stefan Engels and SMU. For the first time, Motete Psalite Publishing is presenting the complete organ works of Johann Sebastian Bach, played by Stefan Engels, professor at this wonderful university. Inspiring recordings are being made here that provide a new perspective on Bach's works. Historical and modern instruments were chosen for the recording on which Bach's organ works can be exemplified. Of particular importance is the concept of subordinating all of Johann Sebastian Bach's organ works to the liturgical calendar of the church year for the first time in a complete recording. Through his work as a church musician, Bach was deeply familiar with the liturgical year, which is why this approach is as logical as it is refreshing. Importantly, it allows his organ works to appear in a new light. For Volume 1, Advent and Christmas, recordings were made in 4 locations in the USA and Germany. The Episcopal Church of the Transfiguration, Kia in Dallas, and the University of Notre Dame in Texas, in Indiana, the Silbermann organ in the Dresden Cathedral at the Hofkirche in Dresden, in Germany, and which the beautiful Baroque pipe organ, the König organ in the Basilica Steinfeld, also in Germany. We are currently preparing for the publication of the second volume of Johann Sebastian Bach's complete organ works, Lent and Easter, to be released in 2024. We have already recorded the first 2 CDs in Germany and Holland on 2 incredible instruments. This organ is in Alkmaar in Holland. Our goal at Motete is to produce high-quality recordings to draw in audiences and to give them a lasting musical experience. And this work is our great passion, and the Motete team has collaborated for over 47 years to discover interesting and novel pieces of music for audiences. Today is our great pleasure to be here with you to showcase the CDs and for Stefan Engels to have the opportunity to play for you. He will play now pieces of Johann Sebastian Bach Prelude in C major, WV 547. Thank you very much and enjoy the music.
where charity and love are at the beautiful river. Thanks to you and to SMU for honoring RTA and the 30th anniversary of this marvelous instrument. Before we have all the other recitalists wander down here, which you can begin doing, a query for you, your time with Bob, and what's it like to be filling his shoes?
Yeah, I think everything has been said about Bob's wonderful teaching and energy and enthusiasm for the organ. And it's a great honor for me to fill his shoes and to continue his tradition that he has established. And it's important for me to look into the future and to make investments into the future with various initiatives. And of course, we also, like we did today, celebrate the history and the past and the tradition. I thought one thing would maybe be important or interesting for you to know, and that is that when I came here as a student in January of 1993, there was no organ in this auditorium. The Aeolian Skinner organ had just been moved out to St. Luke's Episcopal Church, and this organ was not in here yet. So I witnessed the installation of this organ during the calendar year 1993. So I feel very special about this organ and very, of course, much connected to it. Thank you all very much for coming. It's been a great pleasure, and thank you for staying with us for such a long time. I knew it was going to be longer, but I didn't expect it to be long.
It's only long if you look at your watch. If you're just listening to music and enjoying what's going on, time passes quickly. Gentlemen and ladies, would you all come down here, line up in the center of the stage, and take your bows. Thank you all.